On today's episode, we take a look at why not staying true to an established fictional character is a good thing, that Christians are the only people who ever censor, examine how long TSA lines are due to COVID, learn why a parent protecting their child is a bad thing, and finally, take a look at some cringe libertarian views on immigration. This is Cringe Posts. Hey friends, welcome to this episode of the Cringe Post podcast. This is the podcast where we gather the cringiest political and cultural takes that we see in our feeds each week. We go through them, show where they went wrong, try to have a little bit of fun along the way. My name is Britt, and I'm here with my co-host Donnie. And before we get started, make sure to like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. And if you are listening to this podcast and you want to see a visual representation of some of these cringes and the posts that we go through, you can go to cringepost.com and there's a visual show companion there. Now, before we get started, going through other people's stuff, we like to go through, take a walk down memory lane and go through some of our past really bad takes. And just to show that, we're not above reproach in this way at all. And today we're going to go through Donnie's old post, and he tweeted out in October 11th, 2012, Biden once again blaming Bush. I think responsibility is gone from politics. Hashtag VP debate. From your Windows phone. I'll never let you live that one down. Yeah, man. Like, it's so funny. It's like you realize just then that responsibility was gone from politics. It didn't take the past, the 20th century for you to realize that or anything.
Yeah.
I remember, we've gone through one of my tweets about, I think it was this debate, right? This is Paul Ryan.
Yep, that's right.
And I was like, oh, Biden's a big old pig. He keeps interrupting Paul Ryan, as if Paul Ryan was any different in any sort of substance than Biden is. They're basically the same person. One just had a little bit better veneer among himself.
It's just such a dumb thing to think too, because of the fact that Biden's blaming Bush. What on earth could you blame Bush for? There's nothing in Bush's history that you could blame him for. And I don't remember, unfortunately, I don't specifically remember which thing he is being blamed for here. But,
probably 2008.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, you could go through the laundry list of things. You could blame it for the foreign policy snafus, although, Obama did make it worse and horrible. But you have a total right to blame him for that. You could blame him for, like you said, the financial crisis, the housing bubble, the bailouts, any number of things, and you'd be right. Did Obama fix them? No, he exacerbated many problems, and but that doesn't mean you can't blame Bush either. So in every level, this is cringy and dumb. Like, oh yeah, just now I realized responsibility. Like, as if responsibility in politics have ever lasted more than maybe one term for someone, maybe one term for some state House of Representative local member or something. I don't know.
And that person, you could probably argue, would do just as much good for the community in a private life, right? Whether they held office or not, because that's just part of who they are. It just the post reeks of you still believe in the system.
Yes.
Like,
exactly.
This year is now the actually most important year to vote, because it's all on the line here, and if we vote in Obama again, then all personal responsibility is out the window.
Exactly right.
Kind of with the last time I was saying this, but anniversary of 9/11, I was talking with some folks that I knew, because what's been nice, a lot of people have been red pilled by the fact that they're all this crazy hysteria about COVID. They just use the fear to control people. And I was like, yeah, you're totally right. And this isn't actually new though, right? I think about 9/11, and I think it's that I was for that, right? I was for, let's go invade Afghanistan, let's go invade Iraq. I know the people I was talking to were also for that. I was like, you should think about those guys use that fear to enact all the stuff that made the COVID stuff possible now, and actually scary. And that was kind of woke them up, And so I think that's kind of the white pill, if we're going to talk through all the different pills today, of people taking more control, of these guys actually showing their hand, like Biden did in that debate, is people wake up, right? They actually, for that one moment, you see the dishonesty that there is. And then hopefully, that seed of actual liberty loving grows. And so obviously it grew into you, and here you are hosting a podcast with me. So
yeah, well, hopefully more people will move that way. But
yes,
I don't know. Also thinking about 2012. That was a much tamer time. But
It
maybe
was.
maybe that means that we can get more red pills. Who knows?
Yes, yes. All right, moving on to other folks' cringe posts. So this is a meme and a comment. A Tolkien meme page posted this, and it has a picture of the new Galadriel character, and it reads: "By the time Rings of Power takes place, Galadriel was already married to Celeborn. I'm not a big Tolkien nerd, so don't crucify me, Tolkien nerds. So it might be Celeborn or Celeborn. I can't remember. And had given birth to their daughter Celebrian, but we don't see her spending any time with them in the series or even mention them. She even leaves Middle Earth with intent to go to to Valinor without them. Rings of Power portrays Galadriel as an absolutely awful wife and mother." And then the comment on this post reads: "I'm glad Celeborn was able to stay home with the kids. Rings of Power portrays Galadriel as an absolutely awesome woman who found her purpose outside the home, like a lot of us," with a flexing emoji. Now, here's the thing. Like I said, I'm not a huge Tolkien nerd. I've read The Hobbit. I read the first Fellowship of the Ring book, and then obviously I love the movies and all that. I've been watching along with the Rings of Power. I don't know a lot of the background story. You know, I know that there was some stuff that was unfinished by Tolkien that they tried to draw from. Um, but I think the argument that this page is putting forth is reasonable, right? Like that's how I found Galadriel. It's kind of like, okay, if she's married and all this stuff, like she should probably be there. She doesn't fulfill any. It very much feels like a lot of the newer fiction with the Mary Sue, where like they're trying to make a woman's role. Like the only way a woman can be cool is if she behaves like a man, and that's how Galadriel acts in this movie or in the show. Whereas in the movies, she very much embodies femininity and is very powerful though because of it, which is really cool. I mean, if you've seen the movies, you can, you know, the actor Kate Blanchett portrays her really, really well. There's no doubt that she's feminine and she's also kind of terrifying. And so I really appreciate that about the movies. What's cringy about the comment to me is that it's just a denial of the roles that men and women are built with, right? It's like, and it's so dismissive too of women who do choose the very, very hard path of being, you know, a stay-at-home mom, mother. You and I both have the utmost respect, you know, for you know, women that stay home and work. You know, my mom was a really awesome businesswoman, and then she had us, and she said, you know what, it's best for me to stay home and take care of my kids, to invest in them, to homeschool them. And my mom, you know, was kind of rising in the ranks up the corporate world, and she chose that, and she's super glad for it. I'm really appreciative of it because I so much of who I am and the character traits that I've got and the you know, the strength and things that I think are really good about me come from the fact that she just decided to stay home and raise us. And so I find it really dismissive of those type of women that choose that. And then it's also just not an acknowledgement of, you know, reality. There's not going to be anything more purposeful that you find in life than family life, right? And the left and these postmodern folks really don't want you to see that. They want you to be an individualist, you know, in terms of like that you're not connected to anyone. It's like, well, that's a really bleak life to live. And I would say I hope this person finds some purpose that way and experiences it, because I think she'll be revoking her comment pretty soon after she finds it.
You know, it's funny because people tend to think it only flows in one direction where, oh, you know, you only have a problem with this when it's, you know, a woman being portrayed this way. But you think about some of the best stories, and they don't have to be epic or you know, they can be even designed for family, or they can be in this way. And some of the best ones show development even of fathers in that way,
Yes.
where the most important thing you're going to do is raise your kids. So again, you know, this isn't just a specific comment on women. I think about this show. I I I haven't seen all of it. I've seen bits and pieces of it, sort of in order. I didn't watch the whole show, but it's called The Last Kingdom, and the main character is this, you know, warrior guy who named Uhtred, and you know, he's this super smart and capable warrior who's kind of, you know, he's his own he's his own on his own team kind of, but all these other factions really want him to help them and win battles and wage wars, and so he spends all his time helping out these other people and like trying to take back his land, essentially, is the whole quest of the whole show. But in at a certain point, he's neglected his kids so much that he kind of loses them in a sense. And then toward the end, it's shown like he has to sort of win them back. He has to make it up to them because and you know, there's consequences for that. And he realizes that to some extent he's been a terrible father because he's been so absent and neglectful and things. And so it shows that there's that balance. And so, as a libertarian, I mean, all this being fictional is kind of funny, but it's like if Galadriel, finds her purpose in this way, that's great. But as a person in the real world, and with my worldview of being a Christian as well, you also have to recognize that finding your passion there is fine, but if it's at the expense of things that really matter, it's
Yeah.
not a good thing to portray. Now, I'm not saying there should be a law that requires people to be mothers and stay at home, but I do think that we should also be in the habit of affirming truth and reality, and culturally promoting things that are good. So in the same vein of you saying that this is dismissive to the sacrifice and the hard work that mothers put in, I agree. I think that it's one of those things where you shouldn't celebrate the fact, oh, she's being portrayed as an awful mother, oh, that's great because she found her other purpose. It's like, no, you should be like, well, it's good that she found this thing, but she should be able to balance it, because life is full of that too. Because if as a mom all you're doing is investing only in your kids and your spouse, and you do nothing else, you develop no sense of relations with God or relations without your own discipline, right? Your own characteristics of thinking and bettering yourself, you're also going to kind of have a miserable existence, right? So being able to temper everything in life and find the right balance and prioritize the important things, it's kind of a balancing act, and one that you should be portraying in a positive light when you can do it. You shouldn't be glorifying devoting. I mean, to me, this is almost kind of like the same thing. The cringiness of celebrating sort of the male work culture of like the CEO who spends 24
Sure.
hours, 6 days a week at his job, and then comes home and rests for one day. Like, gotta wake up for that grind, bro. No, that's really cringy too, because you're not prioritizing the things that matter.
Yes, and any story that took that and tried to celebrate it, we'd be like, "This is weird and unenjoyable to watch, and has nothing to say because it's not based in truth." Did you ever watch like The Waltons? Do you know that show?
No, no, I
Really
haven't.
old, really old. I think it was like in the 60s or 70s show. My parents showed it to us a bunch. It's just this family in the Depression era. There's like 12 kids in it. Just classic values, awesome family dynamic themes all throughout it. And I was thinking about this the other day because I really am enjoying the new Game of Thrones series, House of the Dragon, and they did a really good job with it. Like not a ton of like gross stuff and a lot of really good character development. But at its core, House of the Dragon has the same themes that the Waltons have. It's a family show. It's not a family show. It's a show about a family and how and how the different dynamics. About whether the father disregards the daughter. How that actually plays out, and it's set in a setting where those consequences will cascade out to the kingdom and people's lives and all these things. But it's the same type of thing, and that's why it's an amazingly well done show, and set kind of in the same like fantasy genre as the Rings of Power. But there's a reason why it has a really great audience review rating, and Rings of Power has under 40% review rating. It's because it plays to that. People can relate to it. They can see that these themes are played out. The characters actually make sense, and they uphold something noble and good and virtuous, or their characters are juxtaposed to something that is noble, good, and virtuous. So we can actually see that contrast. So, anyways, that was maybe we'll do an episode, or I'll do a solo episode sometime on Game of Thrones and the Waltons and how they relate. But
Yeah, the Game of Thrones, that family show that you
yeah,
really like.
that family show. Don't if you're a parent out there, you don't know what that is. Do not watch Game of Thrones with your child. You can watch it on your own and fast forward through everything that's bad. All right. Next one we've got is it was a picture on Facebook that I saw shared, and this person wrote, "Pastor on radio says you should get a physical Bible because they could remove the online version at any time. That is fear mongering. Secular people don't censor. Christians do." Now, we don't need to spend a lot of time on this because it's the cringe of it is self-evident, right? It's like, no, everyone censors, Christians included, in some form or fashion. But this is kind of the first half of it felt really gaslighty to me, which is like, you should get a physical Bible because they can remove the online version at a time. It's like, well, we've seen that happen. We're not with the Bible necessarily, but with tons of data online, narratives being changed. People like Fauci will just contradict themselves online and pretend they never said one thing when they really did. And so there's this move to digitize everything, to make everything, editable and changeable. It's like, well, no, there's something really valuable to something not being able to be changed, and they really want you to move away from physical things. And to me, that means it's like maybe I should move towards physical things a little bit more. I should have that stuff, in my possession. Well, what are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I think it's super funny to think about in particular censorship and the Bible, because you think about how Christians memorized the letters that were written to them and how this has been preserved because they were trying to blot this out, and how the printing press was the major thing that basically stopped the idea of censorship of the Bible and the letters contained therein and things like that. And so it is just really funny to see this person being like, secular people don't censor, it's the Christians. And it's like, well, our holy text is literally aggregated and preserved over the years of trying to avoid censorship and defeating censorship. So at the very least, you have to recognize that secular people do censor as well. And yeah, they're, Christians. I think the difference between Christian censorship, well, let's take it two ways there. Christians censor things. Sometimes they censor things incorrectly, right? Sometimes you have a maybe an incorrect interpretation of how you should be handling the kind of what I would call good censorship, and you take it too far and you enact it on maybe a broader level than it should be done. But there's a good kind of censorship that everyone should engage in, right? Everyone using judgment should be censoring
Mm.
yourself and people for whom you are responsible from things. You shouldn't you should not be exposing your children to themes of maturity they're not yet ready to understand, to process, to handle. I shouldn't even have to explain this, but it feels like more and more in the culture you have to explain things like, no, exposing your kid to radically violent imagery messes their brains up. Exposing them to radically sexual imagery messes up their perception and their connection, their ability to have sex. Pornography has destroyed a generation, in their ability to connect in a meaningful way with other people in a sexual healthy way. So and your for your own benefit, you should be censoring yourself from things that are, we all know that there are people in our lives, there are things to consume, content that make us worse people. That is not, whether or not you even admit that you believe in an objective truth and objective goodness, there are these things that you intrinsically know are not good for you. In the same way that you know drinking a ton of soda and watching TV all day is not good for your body, there are things that you ingest and that make you a worse person. Either they make you more depressed, they make you more skeptical, but not in a healthy skepticism kind of way, more in like a cynic kind of way, things that make you a misanthrope. There's all kinds of content that is not good for you and that you should be aware to censor. So having discernment as to what you do and don't intake is not a bad thing, and Christians should do that. Now, whether you're enforcing that again on a governmental level is
Yeah.
probably not a great direction. And when you see very conservative, I don't, maybe not even literally Christian, but I imagine that culturally Christian schools banning certain books like Mouse, that doesn't make much sense, and that's not a good thing at all, right? That's not a good form of censorship. But there is levels of censorship that are good. And so this saying, oh, Christians censor things, it's like, well, yes, everyone should to a reasonable aspect. As far as censoring things on a bad level, yeah, history shows that secular regimes are just as, if not more likely to censor things than Christian ones.
Yeah, I mean, the first one that came to mind was, Stalin's USSR. It's just like based on secularism, right? And
Right. Or China right now.
yes, yep, yep. I think that's a really, really fantastic point about like that censorship is not necessarily bad in that, like, you do that in your day-to-day life, right? Like I decide, like, hey, that is not profitable for me to watch this or that. I'm married. It's not good for me to, watch pornography or do anything like that or go to a strip club or something like that, because I've made a commitment to my wife and it would be really bad and awful of me to go do that, and it would be unhealthy for our marriage. And so I choose to censor that type of content from my feed, from my media, from my actions, from my destinations and all that stuff. And like you're saying, parents do that for their children, rightfully so. And I think this is kind of this is something that the left a lot of times, not just the left and the right get confused about. They mix up making a value judgment with like making governmental policy. And they think because because Christianity has something to say about what type of content, you should or should not consume, that means that, oh, well, you can't do that because it's not good to do that from the governmental level and all that, or federally mandate that. It's like, well, no, that's, you can have both, right? You can have, we shouldn't mandate and expect the government to mandate these things to us, and we should also be able to say, hey, this isn't good. And ironically, the result that we all want, right, is that people are living better, happier, healthier lives by the government actually handing down censorship by saying, hey, you can't have mouse, or you can't have this or such and such a book in the schools. You don't actually get to let people play out the reality and consequences of their actions and actually see the results, right? Because let's say with mouse, or not mouse, just any book, one school decides to, their parent teachers decide, hey, we're going to ban this book, and they lose 60% of their students or whatever, right? Like that's a result that you can kind of track, and maybe the school will now be like, well, we lost 60% of our students to this other school that is not, not actually banning this book, and so maybe we need to up our prices at our school, right? So they can start finding that equilibrium, and then maybe students actually graduate, and they're like, well, they've got a huge hole, a gap in their knowledge about whatever sort of historical thing or that this book had. And it's like, well, shoot, maybe we should reintroduce this book. When you hand that down federally or from any sort of central power, you get rid of those signals. People can't actually decide and see the results of censorship or what behaviors they choose to. We shouldn't even say censorship. What behaviors they choose to participate in. And so we just shouldn't have any centrally regulated government, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't make judgment calls about what type of behaviors are or are not acceptable.
Well, and furthermore, not only do you not have those signals when it's government action, but the unintended consequences often are far greater. I think there's a pretty big list of books that have been banned by school districts, and almost all of them are in bestseller lists now, because bookstores now
Yeah.
will create sections that are, this book has been banned, and then everyone flocks out to go buy it, and sort of defeat censorship. So not only are you not operating on those signals, but you often get the exact inverse of what
Yeah.
what the action is supposed to do.
That's pretty funny. All right. Moving on to our next one. We've got two tweets. The first one is just kind of more of a comment on a situation. And the second is the actual cringe content. So the first one has a picture of a bunch of people standing in a line at the Seattle Tacoma airport. And it reads, at SeaTac, we arrived 2 hours early for our flight, and we are in the parking lot waiting to get through TSA. There's no way we're going to make it. TSA, what are you going to do to make it right to everyone who's going to miss their flights because of this? For those of you who aren't familiar with the SeaTac airport, the line for getting through TSA is usually not in the parking lot. It's usually about 100 or 200 feet or so inside the actual airport itself. So this is very far away. And then this person commented or replied to it and said, none of those people online are wearing masks. We can't keep infecting workers with virus and then expect everything to function normally. It doesn't work like that. I mean, this is like those type of people when you're having a conversation with them about something that you did or something that happened in your week, and then they do the little mental gymnastics to like flip the conversation about what they did that week or the week before, even though it doesn't relate at all to what you're talking about. It doesn't actually flow with that. That's what this is kind of like. But it happens more than you'd think in a lot of these things. Like, this person is so obsessed with COVID-19. This was posted on September 19th, 2022. Basically after everything has been open, no one wears masks. And, even for this person, the media is not hyping it up. But this person was so fixated and obsessive about this soapbox that they have to turn this into, something about masks and the virus and getting infected and not caring about another person. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I have to say, first, I heard about this because a coworker of mine posted a picture because he was caught in this line, and I was
Jeez.
like, wow, that is wild and crazy. And then this particular exchange was sent in by a listener and friend, Matt. So shout outs to him. Great find. This is perfect A+ content. Thank you for providing it. And what's crazy is I was in SeaTac on Saturday, but I was arriving home from flying from Spokane. So I have a little bit of authority, but I was looking at this person's tweet here, and someone replied to them saying, nobody wears masks anymore. You're crazy. And this person's like, That's not true. Like most people in SeaTac were wearing masks, and everyone I know does, or something stupid to that effect. I don't remember exactly, but it's something along those lines. And I can confirm that is in fact not true. I was in SeaTac on Saturday, and the vast majority of people were not wearing masks. Now, whether or not that impacts the conversation, I think it just shows the level. That's another illustration of what you can already see from this tweet of the level of delusion this person has about what they believe, regardless of the facts. This is terrifying in the sense that the government and the media have done such an incredible job of propagandizing people to the point where they're not even pushing this narrative, and the diehard believers are singing, like the swan song, months after this their false little pretense has been pretty thoroughly disputed and dispelled. It is also crazy to think that the people, I mean, like at best, your argument wouldn't be that the people in line aren't wearing masks. Your argument would be most people in the airport haven't been wearing masks. Therefore, TSA agents have to be calling out sick, and that's what's causing the delays. But this person is saying none of the people currently in line are wearing masks, which means that somehow that's going to slow down the workers, even though we know that even if you caught COVID, you're not symptomatic for at least a few days before you would actually feel anything. And as if you needed any more reason to think that this narrative is stupid, 27 of the 29 security lines were open and being operated. Okay? So there was an article that showed that they documented this. It was not a matter of lines being closed. It was not a matter of a shortage of workers. It must have been a particular heat moment, but 27 of the 29 lines were open. So even if this person had a reasonable hypothesis, even if COVID was this super fast acting, instantly delirium infecting, super communicable because of no masks disease, it would be wrong because the lines were open and operating.
It reminded me of, and I'm not sure if I've shared it on this show, but back in March and April of this year, I went on a trip to Portugal and Greece, two countries that didn't have a vaccine mandate. And upon my return, while we were there, the Washington State lifted the mask mandate and the vaccine mandate. And so we landed, and I need to make it home, so I wore a mask on the plane. The second I got off the plane, I was like, "Well, I'm in Washington, and I'm taking my mask off." And so I did. I also noticed some of the border agents weren't wearing their mask, whatever. Made it all the way through the airport to the tram to get back to the actual parking lot area, and we were on it, and this guy was wearing his mask, and he looks over, he's like, "You need to wear a mask on here." I was like, "Dude, it's no, Washington State did away with that." And he's like, "Well, it's still federally mandated, so you have to wear it while you're in the airport." I was like, "No, I'm not going to do that. Like, I'm not going to." And he got all pissed and sad and all that. And it's like this guy, there's some magical aura that happens when you're in a federal government building that you can get infected if you don't wear a mask. And there's COVID, but the second you step out, that aura dissipates, and now you're free to live as you choose. It's like this person decided to risk public conflict. And I'm a nice guy. I'm not going to do anything to this person. But like, what if I was having a really bad day? I was mentally unstable, and I just chose not to wear the mask for one reason or another. And this guy aggressively yells at me about this thing. Like, he chose to risk that type of confrontation because he believes so much in what the higher up authorities tell him to believe, even though it makes no logical sense. Like, that overcame all of his survival instincts in every single way. It just it was mind blowing to me. And that's what this person, I'm sure if they're there, they would start screaming to all these people. They're obviously in the minority of people that still believe in these masks, but it just overrides all of their ability to critically think. And that's a really dangerous and sad thing. I was telling my wife about it. I was like, that to me signals that that encounter when I returned from Portugal, that signals that there are going to be people years from now still wearing masks, still claiming that you're a selfish person if you don't wear these things and don't social distance and you don't get the vaccine, despite all the evidence to the contrary.
I've just kind of made it to this point where if I see people wearing masks in public, I kind of just like give them like a weird face, because I want them to know that you can choose to do this, but I will also look at you like you're crazy.
You should say, "Hey, like I saw an ad for the vaccine just down the road at Walgreens. Like, you can go get it. You don't have to wear the mask anymore. Just go get it." And
I'm like,
I'm
like,
sure
oh
that,
my gosh, I can't believe you're so anti-science. I mean, disregarding the CDC's recommendations, wearing a mask.
yes, yeah. It's just, yeah. I want to love people and be nice, so I don't say those things, but it
True,
does pop into my brain every now and then
true.
to be that type of sarcastic. But
Yeah, I figure, better than avoiding conflict, but I am going to give them a scowl. I'm going to give them a skeptical
well, of
look
course, that's
because
fine.
you have to, human interaction relies on
They
crazy
scowled at you
behavior
for
being
years.
checked. Right, exactly. Yeah. And so, if I say something crazy and people react that way, internally I get the feedback of, oh, what I just did was weird and not socially acceptable and not proper. And so I feel like it's at least my in this microwave a way I can give feedback to people wearing masks like that is to give them that scowl, be like, what you're doing is crazy. Just give them that little bit of feedback, and hopefully over time it wears away.
Yep, yep, totally agree with you there. All right, moving on to our next one. We've got a person who retweeted this thread. So this person wrote, "Parents like this set up their teens to be abused for reasons that I'd hoped would be obvious to someone who was a teenager at some point in their life." And the abusive tweets and parenting procedures were read this. I didn't affirm my daughter. I removed her from the contagion. Within months, she was pulled, and I called a cease and desist. She saw the truth and left the cult. Over a year later, she's thriving more than she ever was when involved in a gender craze. Basically, talking about, hey, this mom saw that her daughter basically identified as non-binary and said, you know what, I'm not going to affirm her in that. I'm going to remove her from the public school. I'm going to, block a bunch of this stuff. And then she continued on. I removed her from all social media. I purchased monitoring apps to block certain websites from her phone, and I would receive email alerts if certain words are flagged in her searches or texts. I also would not let her spend time with any friends whose parents I did not trust. So basically, this mom was doing a good job. She's like, hey, I've got a teenager who is uh, confused right now, and she's probably confused based on from the environment that she's in and the friends she has and her access to these websites. I'm going to block this. And this person tweets out, parents like this set up their teens to be abused. It's like, no, you don't have a kid. Like, maybe you do, and I feel bad for them. But it's like, this is a parent, like we were talking about with the censorship stuff, was realizing, you know what? I can see further than my kid can. I can see that my kid might be in a phase, that they are most likely in a phase, and that they are on the brink of making decisions that they might regret in the future. So I am going to take action. I am going to censor certain types of content, people, and environments from their life in order to, best help them, proceed on their way towards being a young, healthy, functional adult. And like we were talking about in the last one, the left sees this and they think, oh, this is a violation of freedom. It's like, no, this is freedom lived out, right? It's your freedom to decide how your family is going to be run and how your family is going to be healthy. And let's see how it plays out. And this person obviously saw it played out. It's like, oh, my daughter didn't end up getting a gender transition, surgery. They ended up realizing, oh yeah, I'm not confused anymore. Isn't that better than this person continuing on and this daughter transitioning to becoming a male, surgically, and then regretting it, as most of these people that get these surgeries do, or have really, really long, lifelong complications? Like, that is better. And that's what a parent is there for. A parent is there to make sure that a child doesn't make decisions that they regret later because they don't have the foresight to accurately, analyze and make a decision properly. And that's kind of gets into stuff like the libertarian age of consent and stuff like that. It's like, until a person's brain is fully developed, they can't truly consent until they can actually decide about how, actually analyze the consequences of their actions. So yeah, this person, and it's kind of the left's war on parents, and the family. It's like, no, parents shouldn't have that decision. It should be teachers, right? Other adults that are run by the state and have the permitted opinions that should make those decisions.
Yeah, all of this public sort of, oh man, this is such a controlling and manipulative parent who's enforcing their view. For all of that talk, I have no sympathy when you look at the uh, in cases of teachers actively encouraging people to find their sexual identities in young children,
Yep.
when they're actively coaxing them to go on this agenda. I'm like, you know what? If I thought before you were just a wrong but well-intentioned actor, I no longer think this, because you know these things exist and you are encouraging and supporting that, and that is evil. Being a parent is tough. Being a parent, you have to make decisions on behalf of another human being. And that is a lot of responsibility. And making those calls isn't easy to know which one is the right one. When it comes to medical actions that, it's like you have to choose to amputate an arm or else they might lose their life, but they lose that limb. That's not an easy choice to make because there is a reality there that you have to weigh against. You're taking away a piece of their autonomy in a sense to preserve their life. And that's kind of the decision that happens in this case as well, but not in the way that lefties want it to be. In this case, when a child is dabbling with this massive cultural pressure to try to change a fundamental piece of who they are biologically, physically, in irreversible ways. There's this pressure to do this thing. You have to take away some of their quote unquote autonomy in order to preserve their life. You have to do that as the parent because you are responsible for them because they can't make that decision themselves. And because, it's not even just a matter of a kid not having a fully formed brain. It's a kid not having a fully formed brain up against a culture that is monolithic in
Yes.
one direction. It's not a culture that says, explore every option that's right for you. It's a culture that says, explore every option that's right for you, but here's the right option and you're going to pick it.
And you have all the incentives to choose it, right? Like
Exactly.
there's time and time again examples of folks that like they look around, they kind of hint at maybe, well, maybe I'm not as much, the gender that I was born into, and they're rewarded for questioning their sexuality socially within the actual classroom itself, and the ways even up to the job point, which is like they become somewhat of a protected and incentivized class to be hired because they are quote unquote a minority. And so all of the incentives, societally, are cut in that direction. And what else is a child supposed to do, right? Like a child, I'm just thinking about some of my really young family members, nieces and nephews. I can incentivize the kid to do anything I want with a piece of candy. If I want him to go jump from the couch off onto the floor onto his head, all I have to do is incentivize him with some candy to jump into my arms, and then I can give him a candy and he'll just jump even if I'm not there, right? He doesn't realize the difference in the consequences and all these different things that come along with how life is. And so these poor kids that are being pushed to make these different types of decisions, um, it's it's going to yield really frustrated, angry, depressed adults in the next 10 years. I mean, we're already seeing it. I can't remember what the statistic is, but it's a vast majority of these folks that do transition regret some aspect, if not the entirety of their transition that occurred to them. We've talked a little bit about it and the documentary, but What Is a Woman? Matt Walsh has several of these folks on his show to talk about why they regret what they did, all the different physical ramifications. These people are not told when they are being evaluated for the surgery, the different types of physical things that can happen to them. They're not warned about it, and then after the fact, they're kind of left out to dry, which is really sad. And so, all that to say, it's a parent's job to decide what a child should or should not do that is irreversible. Even if this was something that was totally reversible, had no consequences on it, it's still the parent's job to decide what a kid can and cannot do, because even if physically something is reversible, that mentally something isn't necessary. There's plenty of things that we can do that won't physically leave a mark on us as kids, but mentally harm us, and that our parents' job is to protect us from and to decide when it is the appropriate time for us to encounter those types of things. And so they're just swapping, the parents for with the teachers, right? It's one adult's opinion for another's, and it's not actually freedom. It's not actually protecting a kid's rights. It's just pushing a kid in the direction that they want them to be pushed.
And just to emphasize, if people don't really buy that there's this cultural pressure and these incentives created to choose this, Palm Springs is creating a universal basic income pilot for trans residents.
Oh my goodness.
So you get free money for being trans. I wonder if there are any parents who would love to have some free income because their kid all of a sudden identifies as another gender. Like, as a parent, are you going to actually let your kid, grow out of these feelings like every kid has, like I'm a dinosaur or whatever you have? Or are you going to gently push them into saying, well, maybe you are a little girl. and tell that to the nice federal man here so I can get my $500 monthly check here.
All right, moving on to our next one and our last one. We've got the classical liberal caucus on Twitter. And this is in response to the political stunt that DeSantis is doing, which he's flying not refugees, immigrants that illegally came over up to Martha's Vineyard, which kind of funny, but also sad that this is the way that things have to go. But this classical liberal caucus is commenting on immigration, and they tweet, "You can't have free markets without free migration. Hashtag sorry, not sorry." They also tweet out, "Immigration restrictionism is a violation of the non-aggression principle." And then a more based user commented, so does that mean you'll share your house with me unless you're against the free market?" And then a not so based user commented, "Imagine equating one's house to a nation." So there's a lot to go through here. I think I'll start with the really low hanging fruit, which is imagine equating one's house to a nation. This person is obviously new to libertarian philosophy, which is that private property, there should not be any government property. There should only ever be private property. If there's only ever private property, that means the only border that needs to be enforced is a private border, right? And a private border, if it's open to everyone, is no longer a private border, because a private border should only be open to the people that own the property, who they choose for that to be open to. And so that's kind of the cornerstone of, I can understand there's some really compelling arguments to be made for open borders from a libertarian perspective. But to me, they fall short because they presume that there is a different type of property other than private, that there is public property, which to me is antithetical to liberty and to libertarianism.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a tough call, right? Because there is that natural pull towards, well, the government shouldn't be restricting people's movement at all, and or forcing them to move, as the case may be. And frankly, the biggest problem, just to talk about the sort of the political stunt with the DeSantis thing, is that he told them they were going to Boston and he sent them to Martha's Vineyard. That's probably the biggest problem, because as for every other aspect, it was consensual. They were asked. And I know in Texas they bused people to Boston specifically. And so I actually have no problem with that. Well, I mean, other than, taxpayer funded, actions.
Sure.
But in principle, I guess, because they were asked very specifically, do you want to take a bus to Boston? And then they went there. So again, the biggest problem with the DeSantis one was that he didn't take them where he said he was going to take them. He took them about, I think it's like 90 miles away or 60 miles away. So it's in the vicinity, but not actually where he said he was going to take them. But the broader problem here, that when you have these takes from like the the caucus, it's like they so miss the point. Where the point, and Dave Smith had a whole tweet thread about this, and I saw someone talking about, wow, he's endorsing this authoritarian government action, and it's like, no, the whole point about when the immigration matters happen to people who are affected by them and they speak out, and then the people who aren't affected get on their moral high ground about how it's such a simple issue, like, oh, we just need to allow total free access and total free immigration, and that's not that hard. And then when they're confronted with it face to face, they don't react so kindly. Oh, the cameras are on us, we're going to welcome you and be kind. And then 24 hours later, they were having the National Guard escort them out of Martha's Vineyard.
Yeah.
So it's like,
funny.
yeah, so it's like even all of the context of the debate aside, when you look at this specific action, you can say, yeah, probably not cool to ship people where they weren't supposed to go, but also, isn't this so revealing about how the elites treat real people's problems? And the fact that they don't get that is just wild. It's like, you so missed the point if you're talking about this in the context there's nothing else going on here.
Yeah. The classical liberal caucus's second tweet that we went through, imagine immigration restrictionism is a violation of the non-aggressive principle. For those of you that are maybe newer to libertarianism or not familiar, like the NAP or non-aggression principle is kind of like a moral it's kind of like a moral framework to look at when can you use aggression. And basically, it's like you can't use aggression to enforce anything upon anyone else unless it is to defend yourself. And so they're claiming that by enforcing like a border or saying, hey, this person or that person can or cannot come in, that is violation. It's aggression, and it violates that principle. But I don't think it violates the principle any more than, if I'm in my house and and I'm in the Seattle area, some crazy homeless drug person decides to come into my house and I say, hey, get out, and I'm enforcing my property rights and my border. That's not aggression. That is me protecting my private property. Same thing with their remark about you can't have free markets without free immigration, but you can't really have a free market without private property, right? And in a lot of ways, you can't have a free market with public property. There's no such thing, because that public property is going to introduce mixed signals. It's going to introduce free rider problems. It's going to make sure that resources are not allocated in the most efficient way possible, because the purpose of that property is not serving anything other than some political purpose. And so this classical liberal caucus is supposed to be kind of like the antithetical to the Mises caucus or the new folks running the Libertarian Party. But I don't think they are actually libertarian, right? They don't believe in free property. They don't believe in free markets. They don't believe in private, actually free property. They don't believe in private property or, enforcing your private property rights, which is ironically also not very classically liberal.
Well, and the other aspect to think about it in is if this they often talk about public property and how you can't force people, or maybe it's government property or whatever you have
Hmm.
on this border, right? If government property is paid for by taxpayers, isn't the libertarian position that you actually have some stake in the thing for which you pay? You know, even though taxes are not voluntary, you are putting resources towards the creation, the ownership, that whatever it is, you are putting money towards this thing, and not on a voluntary basis. So you actually have some say in how this thing is operated and moved. And so in order to argue to say that, well, they should be sent back because we shouldn't just allow free movement of this, you actually have the right to say that because you kind of have a stake, a part ownership in that public property or that federal property. And why would you have that say over someone else who maybe has an equal claim? Well, because an illegal immigrant specifically has not paid for that. They don't have equal ownership in that stake any more than me as a non-paying person of your house has the right to walk onto your property and then say, oh, well, I have an equal vote. If Britt says, hey, get out of my property. And I say, well, you know what? I actually have an equal say here too. No, because I don't pay for that property. I have no ownership claim in it. And so, we don't like taxation. We don't think it's a just moral system. But if you're looking at the reality of what is, and you're not operating in this sort of, well, if we had no social welfare state, if we had no government enforcing it,
Hmm.
it doesn't matter. Look at
Yeah.
look at the reality in front of you, and then say, okay, so as it stands, I am paying for this thing that is public, quote unquote, that is federal, and this person is not. And then there's the litany of other issues that you brought up. But even on that philosophical level, instead of just philosophizing in the clouds, philosophize with what's in front of you. What's in front of you is you are paying for property, they are not, and so you actually have a stake in. You have a vote. You have a stake in it. Is it perfect? No, because you share this stake with a bunch of other taxpayer citizens and stuff. But at the very least, you actually are entitled to say, "I don't want them there." And if enough people agree with you, then the reality is that that's how the government operates as is. Is that how it should operate? No, but how the government should operate means that we
Yeah.
shouldn't even have this situation to begin with.
Yes, and that's kind of the beauty of DeSantis's and Abbott's kind of strategy here, is that it's like, hey, like, you, because of these lefties, liberals, Martha's Vineyard folks, up in the Northeast, their decisions, they have forced upon us here in Texas and in Florida, people and places that don't want to have and house these folks. They have forced us to house and take care of them. I was listening to a podcast that talked about how in McAllen, Texas, they had it 1 week. They had 11,000. McAllen, Texas is 150,000 people or something like that. They had 11,000 illegal immigrants come over that they just got dropped off there. in McAllen, Texas, 11,000, and they had to figure out how to feed, house, clothe all those people. That's a really big burden on a city. And so the brilliance of these guys is like, hey, like we don't want them here. All the people up the Northeast, they do apparently because they're voting for things. They're not letting us secure the border. The people in charge are trying to appeal to them. So let's just send the people that they're putting on to us. Let's send them up to them and see how they react to it. And it's hilarious, like you were saying, because these folks, they receive them. Oh, we're going to welcome them. And then, no, just kidding. We need to call in the National Guard. Over 50 of them that came to Martha's Vineyard, the richest, one of the richest places in the United States for the most affluent people to go vacation. So it's politically hilarious and somewhat brilliant in that way.
Yeah, and it's an emotional issue. These are real people who are
Yes.
struggling, often are trying to come over to escape things, and I sympathize with that. But you also have to recognize that you can only ask people to give up so much, right? Like think about it this way, it's to say, "Oh, well, if I am driving to work and I see someone collapsed on the side of the road, I absolutely should pull over, help him up, pick him up, try to take him to a hospital, do what it be. Maybe I show up to work 2 hours late." Okay. So what if then I'm on my way, I'm on my commute, and I'm the only one on this commute. Let's say for the sake of this example, I'm the only one on this commute, and then I realize the reason why that guy collapsed is because there's a bridge above my commute, and there's no guardrail there, and it's a 60 road and a sharp turn, so a lot of people are falling down off this thing. Okay, every day there's a new person, and every day I'm in 2 hours late to work. And now my boss is starting to get mad at me, right? Because it's like, hey, man, you can't keep doing this. I'm going to dock your pay. And then it starts being 3 people a day. So that takes an extra time. So now it's 4 hours out of my day. Like, you understand, and this is not relenting. It's not stopping. You understand why I might say, look, we need to build this guardrail up here because, yes, I should be able and willing to take care of my fellow humans, but I also can't be asked to impoverish myself because of it. I can't be asked to give up everything.
Not sustainable.
Right. Yes, exactly. It's not sustainable. I'm not people in these towns and these cities are not infinite resources. And so, yes, again, for the third time or whatever it is, sending these people to Martha's Vineyard is hilarious because they get rid of them instantly after these towns and these cities have been hospitably treating them for months. And when they give up and when they crack and they do something that's not great, then the media highlights that. Oh my gosh, look at these cages, look at these terrible, ways they're dealing with the people. They're trying to ship them back. They're trying to separate families. And it's like, yeah, this wasn't like the first time someone came over. This is after prolonged periods of this. And finally, they have to take some kind of action. And it's not good action. And I don't condone all of it. But you also have to recognize that what you are doing, what was happening before is not sustainable, like you said. And it's not infinite. And them trying to make the change, you're just showing them as evil people when you're completely ignoring the reality of the situation.
Yeah, no one, including the immigrants that are trying to make it over here, benefit from an unsustainable process and system that has been set up. We can only really handle maybe 2 to 3 million, maybe, of new immigrants each year. That would be really pushing it. We'd be strained all the way. And that doesn't even come close to addressing the problem of the third world, right? Like, it actually makes it worse in a lot of ways because the people that do legally come over here sometimes are some of the more smart, awesome, really talented and competitive folks who have a lot to offer, to their own country. So if we took in all those different people, there's a really great video on YouTube. It's kind of illustrates this with gumballs, but it's like the only way to actually lift the third world out of its poverty is not to take everyone that we deem that we should take. It's to actually be like, no, we can only support so many folks to come in here sustainably without having to resort to those types of tactics of people in cages. And then on top of that, when we do take people, it's depriving talent from these other places that could actually use them to instead of investing over there, we're trying to pull investment over here, and it doesn't work out. I mean, everyone is worse off because of it. And when that type of behavior is incentivized, and you only have to read a few of the stories from these folks that hear that, oh, the border's wide open, I'm going to cross, the Rio Grande with a rope around my waist and the person in front of me and hope that we don't drown, right? Like they're so desperate. They've been incentivized because of this lie, because of this unsustainable system to make these decisions that creates more and more suffering, makes their home way worse off. And then once they arrive here, there's actually nowhere for them to go and no infrastructure to support them. And so that's what people are talking about in the South, on the border towns. They're saying, hey, maybe some of them are racist. I don't know, but that doesn't take away from the fact that it is unsustainable and everyone is worse off because of it. And that's the message I think that DeSantis and Abbott are trying to get across. So that's all I got on this one. Do you have any others?
Nope, I think we're good.
Awesome. Well, folks, thanks for hanging out with us for this show, and we will catch you on the next one.